So, let's see, we got anybody online there, Glenn?
Yeah, I'm online. Could you all see me? Jeff Sikorsky, Chad?
I can hear you on my cell phone.
There you go. We got you now, Paul. You look beautiful.
Okay, all right. So you can hear me in there? Hey, Jeff, can you talk?
Yep, I got you.
All right, how about Chad? Are you on? All right, I'm gonna hang up on my phone then because we were muted, I think. All right, Susan?
You're still on your phone.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you're good now.
Okay, great. Well, I see that Chad is on the line also. Has he spoken? Susan?
No, he has not. I can't see him on my screen yet.
His mic is open now.
His mic is open, okay.
There he is.
Yeah. Hey, Chad. You're muted.
Good morning, everybody. I was
Okay.
just added as a
Morning.
panelist.
Morning,
Now you
Chad.
can see my face.
Paul's muted now.
Paul, you're muted.
All right, how about now?
There.
Good.
Good.
Yeah, it seems like when I unmute, Chad gets muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just going to get the meeting started. And now Chad is unmuted also. And thank you all for coming. I'm down in North Carolina at a beach house, and I think you're in the other part of the state up above Charlotte, Chad. And so Susan, I'd like to since I'm remote, I'd like to let you sort of lead the conversation there.
Okay.
And I
I'll do
know
that.
Chad has a lot that he wants to talk to us about, so maybe you can open up with some questions for Chad. And I thank everyone for being there in attendance, and I look forward to meeting in person next month with you guys.
So just to kind of tee this up, and then I'll turn it over to Chad. If everybody had a chance, or if you didn't see my email of yesterday, I'm going to claim full credit for how great Chad is. I just want to start there.
He would have been nothing if it hadn't been.
He would have been nothing had he not worked in Kilmarnock. I just want to put that out there. No, Chad comes from both an academic and a professional base in the world of economic development. And we were privileged to have him in Kilmarnock for a short duration before he went back to his home state of North Carolina. But I thought it would be really good, since he has lived here, lived in our community, done economic development work in the small town, but is now working on a much larger platform. I thought it would be very helpful for him to share everything from kind of how they're structured, what that looks like, what macro things that they're seeing in the world, and then how they go about the business of gaining businesses, retaining, nurturing down in Iredell County. So with that, Chad, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can. He's got several things teed up, I think, to do as an overview, and then we can handle. Chad, I'll let you tell us when you want to handle questions, if you want to do that during or at the end. Okay.
Yeah, let's do that a little bit at the end, I guess. Or if you want, just raise your hand or tell me to stop talking since I'm not there in person. But pleasure to be with everyone today. I'm Chad Thomas, Vice President of Economic Development here in Iredell County. Iredell County, we are the county just north of the county where Charlotte, North Carolina resides in, Mecklenburg County. So we're just north of Charlotte. We're in the Charlotte MSA. We're a very unique county, which we have lots of land, lots of utility capacity, and we touch 9 counties. We have our employment. We're an employment center for manufacturers. We border 9 counties in the Charlotte MSA. So we actually, our daytime population and our nighttime population is essentially net neutral. So there's always traffic here. We have just as many people going to Charlotte as people coming from Charlotte to our area. A few companies that you may have heard of have their headquarters here. The most probably famous is Lowe's Home Improvement. Their headquarters is here in Mooresville, which is a town in Iredell County. We also have a Doosan portable electric, Denso, which does little DC motors for windshield wipers on your vehicles, and also Corvid Technologies, which is a supercomputer. But Iredell County, so I'm talking with Susan, she wanted me to talk about just kind of the breakup of economic development or how we're structured here in Iredell County. Economic development looks a lot, can vary depending on your community's interests, from the spectrum of 100% public to 100% private. And typically you see communities going somewhere in the middle, whether it be 100% funded by the government or public-private partnership, or 100% funded by the private sector. Iredell County Economic Development Corporation, we're a 501c6 nonprofit that's set up to do economic development services for the entire county. So we have public and private investments. The county, town of Troutman, city of Statesville, and town of Mooresville all pay into our organization, and they account for about 70% of our funds. The remaining 30% are private funders, and those are typically people who are interested in real estate. So we have a lot of general contractors, builders, land use attorneys, but we also have, and banks, of course, but we also have a lot of people who would just want to see the community prosper. And Iredell County, we're very fortunate to have a large investor base with just under 100 investors. And that's part of our job as well, to make sure we have enough investors to pay for our services. We just transitioned to how our funding structure and our expenditures would be set up. Now all the public funds will be dedicated for operational expenses. So personnel, benefits, and leases. We actually have 2 offices in our county. Because our county is so large, we have one where the county seat is, and also in the town of Mooresville, which is just outside of the Charlotte city limits. A lot of our clients fly in from the Charlotte International Airport, and we want to meet them where they're at, not make them travel an extra 30 minutes up to Statesville. And then with that new funding structure with operational costs, now for our private investors, we can now utilize that money for marketing purposes, whether it be business recruitment initiatives, going to site selection, conferences, putting ads. And so that way we can really tell our investors, whether it be public and private, where their money is actually going. In the past, before I arrived, we just kind of all put it in the pool, and then we kind of mixed all those monies. So we're really excited about that. And that way, if the county or the town ever wants us to expand our scope of service, we can request additional monies from the public entities. So it really helps us have that transparency that is required for public-private partnerships. One of the reasons why the county decided that they wanted to create a public-private partnership was, and there's nothing illegal or moral about any structure of economic development, whether it be 100% public or 100% private. It just, there's different pros and cons to each setup. The opportunity to have a public-private partnership was set up because initially there were 2 economic development agencies within our county about 5 years ago, and they were actually competing for projects. And so it was, don't go to, come to Statesville, don't go to Mooresville, come to Mooresville, don't go to Statesville. And 5 years ago, county leadership came together and said, we should have a larger regional message. And I think, to Susan's credit, this has been, I think, 2 areas where regionalism works really well, is tourism and economic development. And oftentimes, the more that you have to offer, the more that you can promote. In economic development, you often hear a phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. And that may be a platitude sometimes, but it really is true. Our communities now, because they're part of a larger economic development organization, at first they were adversarial, and now they're championing each other's wins. And businesses do not see jurisdictional lines. And even a lot of our workforce is outside of our county limits. So a win for Charlotte is a win for Iredell County, and we want to support them as much as possible. I often joke that to our electeds that we get access to one of the world's best international airports, which is Charlotte International Airport, but we don't have to spend a dime for it. Charlotte has to fund that major asset, but we get to promote it from our marketing point of view. So it's, regionalism can be an effective tool, and it helps have those partnerships. And so that's a little bit about our organization. I'm going to share my screen. We have what's called a case for investment, and this helps people understand who we are, what we do. And I've provided them to Susan, and if you have any questions, I can also send them. I think she sent them out already, but I can send them to you as well digitally. But it breaks down of who we are, our board leadership. We have public and private people on our board. But what I think, not to spend too much time on our organizational structure, because that can vary by department. What I like about our case for investment is how it focuses on what we actually do, our services that we provide. And we focus on 6 key pillars, and I'll walk through with that right now. So I can't share my screen. It says host, disabled, participant, shared screen. I don't know if that's something you can do on your all's end.
And while Glenn's doing that, I have the slides. They're pretty big, which is why I'm going to have to break it up into 2 emails to send everybody because of the size of it. But I'll do that after today's meeting.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So I'm gonna put you guys on the screen here so I can see you as well. So that way when I'm looking at I now have you up on my 73-inch television so I can see you and what I'm talking about. But we'll see our 6 key pillars. And you'll notice, and these pillars are actually in areas of emphasis. So our first key pillar is existing industry and retention. Business recruitment and retention is an extremely important component of economic development. Every economic development agency, in my belief, should have a strong, what we call BR&E program, or business retention and expansion program. We know that 60 to 70% of all your growth will come from local businesses. And that is our first point of emphasis, is we want to support our local industry, support the people that are here. The second is workforce and talent. So we work heavily on making sure we understand the workforce challenges, where our workforce, how they are trained, creating career pathways, which is how do you get a person from one job and train them to become a more skilled worker. And so that's meeting with our school boards. We have 2 school districts within our county. We have a workforce development board. We have a community college system, and we have a regional workforce development board. So we are the intermediaries, and we convene all these organizations to let them know what are the challenges within our own community. And so by going out to the businesses, understanding the jobs that what are required today and in the future, and then what our employers are looking for, we're able to communicate that back to the specific districts. And then you'll see number 3 is actually new business development, new projects. And I'm really proud about our organization indicating that that's number 3. A lot of people focus primarily on business recruitment, and they think that they'll go what we call buffalo hunting or whale hunting, trying to go get the big fish. And that is an important component to economic development. But I believe the most effective is focusing on your local economy and supporting them. And when you have a great local economy, then that is your best marketing asset to promote to new businesses. So I'm very fortunate when I'm here in Iredell County to talk about when I go out and promote our community, I can say, look at our community. We have a really good business retention and expansion program. We have what we call our Iredale Ready team, which is our workforce development initiative, and then businesses are very interested in it. The fourth key pillar is product development. Product development is really important now in economic development. Economic development 1.0 was all about incentives. A lot of communities, probably about in the 60s or 70s, were all focused on, we have to offer incentives. We have to, offer incentives, which is true. Incentives are an important aspect of economic development. And then economic development 2.0 became buildings and sites. And what we mean by that is having a site ready for development. And the more that you all can get sites ready for investment is important. What we've seen post-COVID is the speed to market has increased for businesses. They would need a building or a site yesterday. So just a piece of property with a for sale sign doesn't really cut it anymore. When we are going through the RFI process, the request for information, a business wants to know if you have a greenfield site that's looking to do a build to suit, they want to know what the sewer capacity is. If you don't have sewer, what's the time to get it there? How are you going to get it there? What's the cost breakdown? Do they have to pay for it, or are you going to bring it to them? They want to know all those questions before they look at a site. If you're looking at a building, they want to know what's the electrical capacity of that? How long does the annexation process take if you need to annex or rezone? Can you do annexation or rezones concurrently, or are they separate? They want to know all those things. What's the sewer capacity of that site? What's the cost for upfits? Are there any grants available for upfits? So product development has really positioned Iredale County for the future and helped us really win projects. So in the last 2.5 years, we've announced over $1 billion in investment and 1,000 jobs, and that's primarily due to our product development initiative. I've gone out and met with real estate developers who were interested in developing speculative buildings. A speculative building is a building without a prospective tenant. They're going to build it without a lease, and that's risky. And so part of my job was to figure out why wasn't the private development community going to build spec. You see spec built primarily in the residential market, but the industrial market can be a little tricky because there's a smaller net. So as I met with developers, I figured out their pain points, and what I identified here in our market, and each market is different. It was if they were going to build either a business park or a speculative building, the public infrastructure requirements were difficult to fund. They could fund the building, but they could not fund the public infrastructure because banks would say, you don't have a tenant. How are you going to pay back this loan? Or they're private investors if they're a private equity firm. So we went to work on our end and we created an incentive policy to help offset those costs. And each state has different requirements for incentives, but we were able to create an incentive based upon public infrastructure. And I can talk more about that if we have a question later about it. I'm trying to keep it very, very high level. But we went from having about 1 million square feet of potential product development projects that were announced to today we've announced, and so in 2 years we've announced 14 million square feet of industrial Class A product with an additional 3 million in the pipeline. Now, I know that we're talking about two different markets. We're right next to a major MSA, and Kilmarnock, Lancaster County is a little bit further from the core MSA of where you are located. However, what we found was having a plan was important, and then one of the most frustrating things that, in my point of view, that I can say or scenarios is when I meet with a developer and they ask, I'm interested in doing this project. And if the only thing I can say is we're willing to have a conversation, that's frustrating to me because that means, one, I don't know the path forward and I'm not sure how the councils are going to, what the appetite for that investment is. And so after having that conversation 4 or 5 times with developers, and I said, I'm willing to have a conversation about speculative development, I went back with our team and back with our elected boards, our 3 communities in the county, and said, I need a tool that I can promote. So product development has really changed the game. It's been a game changer for us. In economic development, you also hear a phrase a lot that says, no product, no project. So if you don't have products, there is nothing to promote. So any type of economic development strategy needs to have, what are you looking to attract, and what's the product that you have to promote that? The last 2 pillars are marketing and communication and community collaboration community. Marketing and communication is huge for us. We utilize our marketing budget is about $5,000 a year. We don't spend a ton of money in advertisements, billboards. We work more primarily on personalized relationships with brokers, developers. If we do create an ad, it's very specific, and I can show you an ad that we promoted. I'll pull it up right now. So this is a recent ad that we put out in one of the site selection magazines, and it really helped us create our narrative of what we are trying to promote. Before I got here, Idaho County, we were used to winning about 1 or 2 projects a year. And now, because of, as I said, this massive industrial product growth, we have products of all sizes in all communities. And so this was an opportunity for us to really put out that message. And now that we have product to promote, now I feel comfortable putting it in a magazine. So there, on the left, you have some of our statistics, and these are like eye-catching, and then eye-catching stats, and then this shows you where we're at post in proximity to Charlotte and the product. We also went to a site selection meeting in Atlanta and teased this ad in front of some site selectors, and it was really interesting to see their reaction when I gave the ad to them with their mouths dropping. They're saying, how do I not know about this? We need to be in, we need to have a conversation. If you have product, we need to know, we need to have a conversation. So that's a little bit about who we are, how we're structured, and what we do. If you're curious, you can look at our LinkedIn account. Our LinkedIn account is our primary recruitment tool for marketing. That's where our audience is. Our builders, our site selectors. We do have Facebook, we do have Instagram, but I mean, let's be honest, a site selector isn't going on Instagram to look for available buildings and sites. So our Instagram will be more of quality of life information, and our LinkedIn will have more meat and potatoes. And then I also do a little more promotion on the LinkedIn account on my personal page. So that's those 2. And then really quickly, and I don't want to just talk forever. Let's see. I guess while I'm pulling up the next thing, does anybody have any questions before I kind of shift gears?
Hey, Chad, Jimmy Carter, how you doing, man?
Hey, Jimmy, long time no
Yeah.
see and talk. How you
Glad
doing?
to hear you doing so well. So, a couple of questions. When you said you were connected in 9 counties, I thought you meant there were 9 counties in the SMSA. You really are bordered by 9 counties when I see the map. Unbelievable. What's the advantage of a 501c6? I don't know it. I don't know what that is.
Yeah. So the 501c6 structure allows us to do 2 things. One, we are not just a straight charitable organization. So we're set up very similar to a chamber of commerce, which means we have memberships. We call them investors. So that gives it that allows us to be semi-exclusive to people who we want to be a part of our organization. We don't have to have everybody at the table. Not to say that you should not have a wide range within your board, but we also don't want to compete with our chamber of commerce as well. Like we don't offer after 5 o'clock drinks, right? That's not what we do. We have a very specific message. And so when we create our membership, we want members who are very supportive of that case for investment. So we have those strict, those very direct conversations of this is who we are, this is what we do. Would you like to invest in us? And this is your value add. The second thing, so first is memberships, and the second thing is 501c6s have the ability to advocate or lobby at the IRS level. We don't necessarily do that. That's not we typically won't do that. But if there's something that we can, we typically will do that for like major, we may write a letter of support for infrastructure bills at the state legislature. We typically don't advocate specifically for project specific, like we don't go to a community and say we support this project and the community has to, we don't throw it down their throat necessarily. Not that type of lobbying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in terms of your structure then for public and private partnerships, do you work under the 501c6 or do you have a different structure when you do partnerships?
Yeah, so we most of what we do have a 501c3 set up for like a foundation, and that allows, because some banks will only use their CRE dollars or can only spend CRE dollars as part of their investment. And so they need a place to put that money. And so we can say, hey, here's a charitable organization, and we'll structure it that way. But I would say about 90% of what we do is within the 501c6.
And so if you have a public-private partnership, you operate it in the 6?
You're right. Correct. Yep.
Okay. So
Hey, Chad, this is Jeff. Sorry, Jimmy.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Chad, you know us well. You know our business base. Would a 501c6 make sense for us? Because we have mostly small businesses. We have very few. Like, what would our investor pool look like? Would that even make sense for us?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think so. The 501c6, and let me kind of give some more about the advantages of a 501c6 versus and cons, right? So one of the advantages of a 501c6 or just a public-private partnership, however you want to structure it.
Hey, Chad?
Yeah.
This sort of fills into what Jeff is talking about here. But we have an economic development authority. Mm-hmm. And can you, as you're going through your explanation of the benefits, can you contrast it to the EDA? Because one of our discussion topics is how to make the EDA a lot more vibrant in our community and a catalyst for economic development. So would you mind sort of couching it in that, your response in that way?
Sure. Yeah. Because Virginia has EDAs. That's kind of how they're set up. I think let me answer your specific question, Jeff, and then I'll kind of talk about the advantage or some of the pros of a 501c6. What I would do is I would look at communities similar to you all in Virginia and ask what works well for them, because you are correct, your investor pool may be a little smaller. And so a 501c6 may not be advantageous. You may not be able to leverage that much more additional dollars. And so that's what we did as well here at the EDC is we often, before we do anything, we always look at like markets and see what works well for them. So that's what my suggestion would be. And then the second thing is really, what do you want your organization to be? Because if you want direct, so if the county wants direct control, 100% control over what the economic development director does, then it would make sense to put it in as a government position, and that's not bad. And there's plenty of cities, counties that have economic development director positions. Even some of your biggest cities have them. However, you can also create. So one of the advantages of us being a 501c6, it's helping leverage public dollars. So that way, and I know that we're not comparing necessarily apples to apples, but for the city of Statesville to have a complete, to have one of me, it would cost them probably $150,000. That includes salary and benefits and some of my just stuff all tax tag and title, what it would have for me. That's a really expensive position. But because they leverage the city or town of Troutman's and town of Mooresville and Iredell County, they all pay into a system, then they're able to get a little bit more bang for their buck. And so that's one of the advantages, leveraging public dollars. The second is that we're able to have direct conversations, and there's a level of separation from economic development, and all economic development is protected under FOIA's or public request laws. So if a project was economic development, you don't necessarily have to share that information. But because we're not a government agency, there is no government request. So we don't even have to acknowledge it. We can have let's say that we often do this as a liaison. If a project is having an issue with permitting, a permitter cannot say, applicant, if you would just do this, then I could approve your project. And the reason why is because we live in a democratic republic where we have elected officials, and we don't want to live be a tyrant and tell people what they can and cannot do. And so legally, your planning staff cannot tell your applicants what to do. And so there comes this friction point of the developer says, well, if they would just tell me the path, I would change my application. We could move forward. And that's where a lot of times we come in, is we'll talk with planning staff and say, hey, what are some options? And then we give that message back to the applicant. So that way the planning staff or the engineering department is not having those conversations. So it kind of protects the county and the town as well. So we're a partner with the town or the county. So that kind of helps out as well. But I would also look, and then back to your question, Paul, looking at the EDA is that's a tool that we don't have here in North Carolina. So I would look at other smaller markets that how are they utilizing that EDA for either their organization? Are they helping offset some of their costs from personnel? Because it is a tool, and how do you leverage that to the best of your ability?
Hey, Chad, Jimmy again. So with the insights that you gained into this community while you were here, and now that you've stepped away, what advice would you have for us in terms of how we may proceed with, what are we doing, what are we not doing that we should be doing, in your opinion?
Well, that's a very good question. I think I don't know about what you're not doing and what you're doing. What I think is coming up with a plan of who you want to be and what do you want your community to look like, and creating the necessary tools to get you there. And then also, what is your message? If you look at what Virginia's River Realm has done to promote the regional tourism message, it's really enabled your area to say, okay, what makes us unique? What's our value proposition to our competition? And that's why I wanted to go through our slide deck as well. It's what makes us different, and why would someone, if we were competing for a project, Why would they choose us? Because you can't, if you're saying we're the best place to do business, every community says that. If you're saying we have a friendly, we're friendly, we have low taxes, that's not unique. So what I would suggest is really understanding the data points. For example, Virginia's River Realm, I forget the number, and Susan, I'm sorry, but it was so many miles of shoreline. That number is
465,
so
Chad, you didn't get the tattoo.
I know. I am wearing my oyster socks.
Good,
though,
good on
today,
you, good on you, I like that.
But that message, when you give that to someone, they can digest it and says, oh, that's unique. I haven't heard that before. And that means if I want shoreline or if I want to go visit an area, hey, that could be somewhere for me. And so what I would suggest is when you're looking at economic development is don't get googly-eyed over the big fish. It's looking at the business recruitment, looking at workforce. I mean, you all know the challenges of your community. It's how are you addressing them? And that's when you're competing for projects. Companies will say, great, you have a site and you have this. We're looking at your area. What are you doing to address workforce? And if you don't have an answer, that's difficult. That's difficult to be in that room. And I know these topics they're political and they're third rails, but from an economic development conversation, you have to have a response. What is your ESG plan as a community? How are you doing on environmental, social, and governance? I know that is a very hot topic right now and for some talking heads, but communities are asking us, what are your sustainability goals? Because they're getting pushback from their investors of how they're going to meet those goals. And so we have to have a legitimate response back to them. If you know, if you have a site, knowing the data to support that, what is your sewer capacity? If you don't know that, that's going to be a hard conversation. And not being afraid to invest in infrastructure, because infrastructure wins projects. If you don't have capacity to serve it, there is nothing to be had. So like from an economic development standpoint, you need product to promote.
Chad, thank you for your presentation. Jason Bellows, current supervisor here. We've talked a little bit about a corporation or a CDC kind of here, and what I kind of see this as a benefit, real benefit to elected leaders is essentially, I'm not an expert in economic development, but I have a team of people I've partnered with that I am. Here they are, go work with them, and they'll fill you in on all the things you need to build a site here or move your business here or do any of those things, because your job every day is to focus on that, and that's all you do. Here at the county, our county staff has many hats they do and many things they do, so they can't necessarily commit the time or the resources. So what I see is that if we can set up this sort of CDC development corporation that can harness all the levers of government, they can also harness private-public partnerships, and then with that pool of money who's solely focused on that, they wake up every day and they do that job, and that's all they do. And then they're not worried about the other complaining constituent coming in, taking up time, or some other thing taking away their time, because they don't have to deal with any of that. So this is, to me, it's like, it puts seriousness behind creating an organization that basically focuses solely on that single focus of creating or fostering current business.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I also would say, I think you just need someone that intentionality, right? Whether it be a separate organization or a public-private organization, or even someone that's solely dedicated to economic development. And I think I can speak to this since I was in Kilmarnock. It was amazing to me how many people, when Kilmarnock created the economic development position, how many people called me and were just like, oh, there's someone to talk to. And I wasn't necessarily I wasn't in a different organization like I am now at Nardo County, but they felt like this is where my call should go to. So when I was working on the redevelopment of the bank site in downtown for the Domino's, they were able to have those conversations with me, and then I could be the liaison to planning and ask Marshall, hey, before you answer, because if they as we say in the South, you only get to toast the bread once, right? You can only toast bread once. And so you can only ask once in your application, like when you present something. And so before the applicant is introduced to the actual permitting staff, it's, hey, they're thinking about that. Like, I have a project that's thinking about this. What are some of the issues that I should be aware of? And he can just talk to me freely. And then I can communicate that back to the client and say, hey, you know, like there was electric pole, or they were thinking about doing a secondary or a second floor awning or seating area. And I told them, well, there's a massive electric pole right there. It's going to be costly. We can talk with some people and see if it's even possible to move it. But we were able to have those conversations. And so I think I wouldn't get too caught up on, or necessarily like this is like let me take a step back. I think oftentimes people in economic development or people, they'll say, oh, this is the panacea. If we do this, then this is the path, you know, to the promised land. And that's not the case. And so I wouldn't say like the 501c6 is the only successful way, but I do think having that intentionality behind it as someone who is going to come in and give you this, like these stats and say, okay, what is our message? What's our geography? What makes us different than Warsaw? Like if we're competing between Warsaw and like why would they choose us? You should be able to know that, and they should be able to just drink the Kool-Aid. They are your chief cheerperson, right?
And I like the idea of just having that bit of separation between the government, not having just an economic development government employee, because then they are bound by all the government bureaucratic rules sometimes, that if you create this separate organization, you can create a layer there that relieves some of this bureaucracy, but also creates avenues for those conversations you were talking about that happen behind closed doors that lead to successful conclusions of projects down the road, because you've addressed all the contentious issues out and behind the scenes before they actually blow up in public.
Chad, this is Susan. Just to Jason's point, in a real world scenario in Iredale, who generates the client? Is the client starting with you guys now because you've been established long enough and they know to come to you, or does the client get fed to you from the private sector, from your government partners? What have you guys evolved to in terms of the mechanism to get that client in discussion?
Yes. So our projects come from a variety of sources. They come directly from the state. So the state has an organization called EDP&C, Economic Development Partnership in North Carolina. They'll send out. Another reason why it's important to have an economic development agency is the state will only send out RFIs to county organizations. And so we're set up. That's just in North Carolina. I'd have to be a little more well-versed in Virginia again. So anytime there's a state RFI, we are notified of that. So that's one way. The Charlotte Regional Alliance also has an economic development authority or kind of agency that will do some marketing. But the majority of our projects, especially our active projects, right now we have about 44 active projects, and about 70% of them are direct from brokers or the actual companies. And so by having a website, we just got a phone call yesterday of a massive battery manufacturer from South Korea who was looking on our website, and they contacted the broker who we put on there because there's a marketing flyer, and they wanted to know more information about the site. And so having a website helps, and having contact information. And I love soccer. It's a soccer analogy. Oftentimes the best thing you can do in soccer is just put it on frame, and if you want to score a goal. And I believe in economic development. That's what we try to do every day. Is we're going to have our information on LinkedIn. We're going to have a website, and then we're also going to create very good relationships with developers, brokers, because, and I think to answer more your question now, Susan, people know to contact us directly because we can manage that project from inception to announcement. They're very confident of who we are, what we can do, and we have something to offer, which is an incentive attached to it potentially as well.
Hey, Chad, Jeff again, talk to me about product. I mean, you know our area. I mean, our likelihood of attracting a whole business versus retaining and growing existing businesses or attracting people to work from home, to coin one of Jimmy Carterisms was bring your own job. Is that a path for us, I guess is my question. I know Virginia Economic Development Partnership has a whole map of, I guess it's category 1 through category 5s of being able to move in. Is that a viable strategy for us, or are we just flapping in the wind if we try to do that?
That's an excellent question. And I think one is there's kind of two paths that you take in economic development. One is the short game. It's kind of like golf, right? You have your short game and your long game. And I think you should have two plans of what are you going to do right now, and then where do we want to see ourselves in 30 years? Because if let's say you want to do a business park, that is probably a long-term play, and you're going to have someone who is really dedicated to identify the area, and then figuring out the conceptual layout, and then making sure you have the right utilities, and then slowly piecing that together. And the reason I say that is we have a business park here in our county, and it was purchased in 2006, and it's right currently at about 60% capacity now. And that's we're in a hotter market, but you can see how long these projects and these economic development projects take. So it's a game of patience as well. I always find it interesting. So like in your area, people always ask, like even on the residential side, would someone buy a spec house? But then like you see houses, when I lived there, I didn't see a lot of houses stay on the market very long if it was a good quality house in the right price range. So for me, it's making sure that the product that you're building is for the product or the companies that would be there. Maybe you're not looking at a 600,000 square foot industrial building with 500 employees, but maybe you're looking at a 10,000 square foot building with 10 employees. There was one company that I met with in Kilmarnock in their business park that does like fishing reels. And they recently, when I was there, they had bought a CNC machine, and he was talking about like if they were able to, I helped him get in touch with some people who do ISO training to help them get government contracts. Once they got their ISO certification, they were able to expand their offering. And maybe it's not, like I said, this massive project. Maybe it's businesses like that where you're having 2 CNC machines and jobs of 10 to 15, but that are paying really good wages. So I think I believe the answer is yes. I think it's just, how does that look like for your community? Or if you want to attract remote workers, how are you doing that? Just to say, hey, we're a great place to remote work. Every community is a great, every tourist place is. So it's what makes you different. Like, maybe all you need to do, maybe your low-hanging fruit is just creating a website that says, this is the reason why we're a great place to be for remote work. Here are your speeds. here are some of the assets, and envision yourself here. So I think Jeff, yes. I think it's just how do you scale it to your area specifically, but also have the patience for some of these longer term projects.
Thank you.
Chad, this is Roy Carter. I'm on the EDA, and we are an authority of the county. We have 7 members, but we're all volunteer, and we only meet 4 times a year. One of our biggest challenges is raising money to be able to support grants for small businesses. Do you have any ideas about? We're not a public-private organization, obviously, but do you have any ideas of funding grants either through state or federal for EDAs?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and let me think about that.
Chad, while you're thinking about that, one follow-up with that, with your organization, like say people like can pass on money in their wills and stuff to you, correct?
They could if they wanted to. That'd be great.
Do y'all get donations and stuff like that, or do y'all solicit for stuff like that?
We don't solicit for that. If someone wanted to donate money to us, that'd be fine.
Like one of your wealthy contractors who happens to pass away and leaves a large portion of their money to your organization?
Yeah, that would be unfortunate and also fortunate at the same time. They could. We haven't had that happen yet.
We have a lot of that around here where people like leave a lot of money to organizations or create new foundations around all the money they ended up having. And so I think if we could create such an entity, the source, we'd have a lot more people that would fund into that entity knowing it has a particular mission versus our government EDA. No one wants to give money to the government. No one wants to give extra money to government. Nobody everywhere tries to get paid less money to government. They're certainly not just going to write a big check over and be like, here, government, go do good economic development work with that. That's never going to happen.
So Chad, just as a follow-up to that then, so for your private funders, the 30%, is there an expectation of return to those private funders? Do they have an expectation, or is there a return mechanism for them?
Yes, and it's changed since I've come on board, and also, but there is an expectation for ROI. So as part of being an investor, you get access to us, and you get access to what we're seeing. We produce annual reports and quarterly investor reports. So I give them a breakdown of, and I can send that as a follow-up, Susan. But we produce and we'll scrub all the confidential information, but we'll tell you how many RFIs we've responded to, what are the requirements that we're seeing. And that way, when you have a conversation with a developer and you say, hey, I think you should build spec in my community, they can say, okay, well, how many RFIs have you responded to? I can give them exact data. I can give you the requirements, what type of projects they're looking at, in what areas. So we do, that's part of it. We also allow opportunities for people to interact. So if you're a business developer from a new general contractor in the Charlotte market and you're trying to figure out how to get involved in our community, our place is probably a good, come to one of our breakfasts and be introduced to some of the movers and shakers of our community, some of our elected officials. But there is an expectation. I have had to change, and this is where maybe this is more of my government upbringing, but to eliminate the exact quid pro quo relationship of you invest $1,000 in my organization and I'm going to give you a multi-million-dollar contract. That is no longer the expectation or the, I've had to have some pretty stern conversations with some of our investors. Happy to make introductions and things. The last thing is what we do is if we do have a project and they're asking for services, so if they need a general contractor, if they need an attorney, we will refer our investors first. If they're happy with that, we'll just leave it at that. If they come back and ask for additional references, then we can send them. But we primarily only refer our investors to clients.
Okay, so since I'm going to have to ask the anal follow-up question, if I can. So
Please do.
well, just because I'm ignorant today, the private funders, are they cash funders to the Economic Development Corporation? Or are they in kind with land and other opportunities?
Yes, we accept both. About 98% of our funders are cash. We
Okay.
do have a few people who do in-kind things for us. So we've had in the past one engineering firm who has given us like up to $5,000 of free engineering services for our own projects that we're working on. So we would take that as in-kind. We also talked, because we knew we were going to retrofit our offices. We got $5,000 worth of really nice furniture from a furniture company as in-kind. So sometimes we're strategic about some of our in-kind investorship, but primarily we want cash funders.
Chad, do the investors get a tax benefit to donating to your organization?
I believe they do. And if they need, once again, as I mentioned, like a lot of our banks, like Wells Fargo, with some of their pressure that they've placed upon themselves through decisions that they've made internally, they're required to only put money in 501c3s. And so that's why we have a 501c3. So if someone has money, we're going to figure out a way to take it or a service.
Wells Fargo wouldn't be in the trouble if they were in, if they had actually funded those fake accounts.
So, yeah.
Hey, Paul, just to let you know, I've got a hard stop. I apologize. I got to be at the hospital 11:30, so I've got a hard stop at 11:15.
Okay, all right. I do have.
I guess
Yeah.
the other thing is, I don't know if, I forget if the EDA is a revolving loan fund, or creating a revolving loan fund. That's the only thing that came to my mind. Either utilizing CDBG dollars, some federal, there are federal funds out there to create a revolving loan fund. So that way you're constantly replenishing the funds. That would probably be my only suggestion if that hasn't been explored yet. But sorry, Paul, I cut you off.
Oh, yeah. You had talked earlier about incentives for dealing with you. What specific types of incentives do you have to attract businesses or expand businesses?
Thank you for asking that question. I can do a deep dive in that. So in North Carolina, there is specific laws around incentives and how we can structure them. And so and that's why I think it's important to have someone who eats, drinks, and breathes economic development that is guiding everybody through what you can and can't do. So in North Carolina, all economic development incentives have to be performance-based and competitive. And they have to provide a public benefit. And we have to, there's a but-for test. A but-for the incentive, the company would not have selected a community or a site selection decision. And we have to demonstrate public benefit, which is primarily jobs and investment, sizable investment. Luckily, the legislature did not define what sizable investment means. So that's very subjective, but it needs to create jobs and investments. So when a project would like to explore incentives, it's our obligation as a community to define that sandbox of what type of projects would even qualify for incentives. Would it be manufacturing, distribution, healthcare? You could do residential, whatever. So the community defines what they want to incentivize, and then you have to. We establish specific thresholds of where we will start incentivizing. So we don't participate on every project. For our community, we have a very competitive incentive policy because we compete just because of our competition. In North Carolina, we have tiered communities, and within the tiers, the state will participate at a higher or lower level, very, very similar to Virginia. So lower tier communities or more economically challenged areas receive more incentives from the state, or it's easier to get an incentive. For us, it's a little harder. So if we want to be in the game on incentives, our incentive policy has to be more than some of our surrounding communities. And as you saw, those 9 communities that we touch, they have lower wages than what we do. So we have certain thresholds that they have to meet for a new business to qualify for incentives in Idaho County. The threshold is $3 million of new taxable investment. For an existing industry, it's $1 million. And then they have to create, if it's a new business, they have to create at least 10 jobs at or above the city's average wage. And if it's an existing industry, there is no job creation requirement. It's just job retention. And so as you're looking at incentives, it's what are we getting in return? And there are those performance thresholds where we will verify that they have met those thresholds before any incentive is paid to them. As I mentioned, it's a performance-based, so they have to meet the thresholds and then they receive a cash grant. It functions similar to a rebate, but it's not a rebate. Rebates are 100% illegal in North Carolina, so we do not call them cash rebates. It's a cash grant. And how we come up with the value of those cash grants, we take a certain percentage of the new taxable value of that investment, and we grant them a percentage of that back to them. So what happens is company makes the investment, they create the jobs, they submit for payment. Whatever their new investment was, the taxable value of that, we then grant them after they pay their taxes to us. So the money comes to us. We then give them a check at 80% of the real property and 50% of all tangible personal property. So the communities are still retaining a portion of the project or portion of those public funds. And then at the county level, it's 75-50. But we've worked through all our communities to create an exact incentive policy to make sure that they're comfortable with what we're promoting and making sure that those specific thresholds are, what are they trying to incentivize? So so like in the town of Mooresville, they have higher wages and they do not want, they've told us recently that they will only consider projects at a certain wage level, and that's fine. That's an opportunity cost, so we don't bring them projects unless it meets those thresholds.
Yeah, the semantics here would be real important because that rebate sort of like grant issue came up in Isle of Wight County. Issue was something they did on rebate with the International Paper Company suing them. It went all the way to the Supreme Court and they lost. And so essentially all local governments sort of lost in this fight, and it's still being sort of fished out what the ultimate like ramifications are. Because they did some kind of business recruitment tax rebate thing and called it a grant, and basically had to pay it all the money back to International Paper and potentially other ones, but none of the other ones that they did have sued them yet. So, but it can open up all of local government to such potential lawsuits if they don't do it right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what helps us is making sure that it's performance-based, because I do think that it's not advised to incentivize a bad project. And incentive is to motivate a good project to make the decision. And so I think from an economic development standpoint, I take the philosophy of you should be the last dollar in, not the first dollar out. And so as you're thinking about that, it's how do we close gaps, not how do we just give out money. And so by having it performance-based and having those thresholds help. And then also we would, even at the local level, my experience in local government, we would never, ever incentivize tangible property. It was always in real property. Any type of incentive was to help with real property. If you're buying, like machinery and equipment can be very difficult. If there's a project that doesn't perform, I worked for one city where they helped a local business fund an ice cream machine, and it took me 2 years to find that ice cream machine. So it can be very difficult to get your tangible personal property back. If you have it in real property, you can always lien the property, which it's a little more secure.
Chad,
Do you
just-
do any incentives around developing infrastructure like water and sewer to a site? Or-
The way, yeah. So what we do is, so we have incentive policies. If there's a project that does not fit within our incentive policy, then we talk to the local communities of saying, and we say, how can we close this gap? And that's where we had, kind of back to the industrial development or speculative development policy that we created. We created a way to utilize the money that was actualized in the investment of the property, and then we would reimburse the project for their public infrastructure cost over a period of 3 to 5 years. So that's how we did it. And then also the local governments can also do whatever they choose to do. But we only promote the incentive policies that we have available to us.
Thank
So
you.
Chad, as you're, to that example about Mooresville coming back to you and asking for a little bit different threshold, are there individual incentives coming from the jurisdictions that are part of the public, that are the 70% public funding? So you have kind of a matrix by jurisdiction almost, as opposed to one
Yes.
overlapping process? Okay.
Yep, so whatever the community wants. So for example, the town of Mooresville offers an additional incentive bonus for certain types of jobs. If they're at 100 or 120 or 150% of the town's average wage, they'll actually give additional monies. That's not within like our traditional kind of like boilerplate incentive policy. So that I have to make sure that and that's where you have, it's nice to have me where I have an intake form that I use. I calculate the incentive. I make sure that the project meets all these thresholds before it even comes to you all, the electeds. It's, I vet the project and make sure it's not a dreamer project, that's legit. And that way, anytime you talk to me in closed session, we're talking about legitimate projects. I'm not just blowing smoke, which can often happen in economic development, right? A lot of times people say, hey, I got a lot of activity, I got a lot of things going on. My job is to bring legitimate projects to the councils.
I'd just like to say thank you. I thought it was really informative, and I think you gave us a lot of insight from what I've heard today.
The one
It
thing,
also was, I thought, kind of refreshing, because I think we've also kicked around some of these ideas and
Oh, for sure.
thoughts for sure already, so I think that we're heading in the right path.
one of the things, Chad, I'd ask you to just comment on, because the last time you and I met, we talked about workforce development and some of the real creative stuff you guys are doing to bring the right community partners together to help an incoming business. And I think, could you just share that? Because that's a huge challenge here, as it is in every community. And I think you guys are at least getting your arms around how to get creative about that.
Yes, thanks. So we've created an initiative called Iredell Ready. And we just recently announced our landing page, and we'll have a website. But as I meet with site selectors and businesses, as I mentioned, Economic Development 3.0 is now workforce. And they assume that you have an incentive. If you're presenting a site to them, they assume that you've already done your due diligence and that site fits their needs, that they've already told you. Their questions now are, how are you addressing workforce? Not how are you solving it, but how are you addressing it? Workforce is so one thing, when you look at it from a 30,000 foot view, workforce is a challenge no matter where you go. But if you don't have a plan that gives companies a lot of anxiety over making a site selection decision, and just some of the things that we know nationally, we know that the population, our birth rate will not supply enough jobs or enough people for the jobs that are required. So we know automation is going to happen, and automation will help with this. but workforce will be a challenge throughout the entire United States of America. And then we have communities who are declining in population. And so if you're looking at a business, or if you're talking with a business who's thinking about making a 10 to 30-year investment, encouraging them to invest in a place where your population is declining, that is a hard pill to swallow. So the question is, how are you addressing that? And so one of the things that we did, in Idaho County specifically, our population is growing exponentially. So we're pulling from all the communities that are losing population from our surrounding counties. But at the same time, we still have workforce challenges just like everybody else. And so what we found, what we did is we created the Idaho Ready Initiative, which we got all of our workforce partners, school boards, elected officials, workforce development boards, and figured out we need to have a cohesive message when we talk to businesses about what we do. As an economic developer, I need to know what are the opportunities at the trade school, at the community college. I need to know everything. And then also, we're able to bring our team on site for a project. So what we do is, of all our new announcements or projects, instead of me saying, hey, here's a referral for you, why don't you talk to the president of the community college system, or why don't you talk to this person and give them a list of people to contact. What we do is we set up a meeting and we bring all the partners to them, and then they can talk about what they do. The project can talk about what services they offer, and then they can have that interaction. And I'm just the intermediary to make this all happen. And it's been, maybe I'll send you an article. Susan. Jet East is a recent announcement. It's an airplane maintenance company. And they said they have never seen a community do this, where they just said, hey, we have a question about workforce. And we brought, to them 20 people who could address their issues. And now they're creating an airplane curriculum at the school district. It's pretty cool to see what's happening just from these conversations. So kind of back to what I was saying before, it's that intentionality. Someone who eats, drinks, and they just eat, breathe, and live this world of how can they meet and make it successful, I think is really important.
Well, thank you, Chad. It's been great. It's 11:15. I see that Jimmy has had to leave. Do we have any final questions for Chad right now?
Thankful for your time, Chad.
Are you interested
Yes.
in forming a CDC in Lancaster County and being the executive director?
No on both accounts, but I appreciate the honor.
All right.
Thank you, Chad.
Yes, thank you very, very much.
Awesome.
So I think Chad has given us a whole lot to talk about in future meetings. And Jason, when we look at the CDC, Community Development Corporation, that may be a similar entity that Chad is involved with a similar type responsibilities. So I think probably one of the things that we really need to do is define exactly what our expectations are. If we're going to create a CDC, what are our expectations? What types of things are we trying to accomplish with that?
Yeah, definitely.
And how do we think?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. We would, as an entities, we would define out sort of what our plan and the mission, but then once we could hire and direct, it was kind of like the broadband authority, getting an executive director to carry out their agenda became a moot point after the Dominion stuff. But for order to carry forward these bigger projects, you've got to have somebody who's basically what he says, eats, sleeps, and drinks it, wakes up every day. That's all they do. They don't take phone calls or get distracted by any other thing that government can do or a government employee can be tasked with. It's kind of like a teacher. They're supposed to be teaching in the classroom, but they get tasked with 50,000 other things because of the nature of what we've turned in public education to. We'd be much better off if the teachers went into the classroom and we funded them to teach. if we want economic development, we need to fund an economic development project or a person who does that solely. The best way I see it is that entity, because you don't get entangled with all the bureaucracies of government necessarily, when you can have those conversations that government employees can have with potential developers or potential new business or businesses expansion. It's sort of working behind the scenes before you work in front of the scenes. And it's hard for government employees or elected officials can't do that as well as when you have an entity that we can just say, we've set up the mission, we've set up all those things, that's our task. But now we've hired this entity to carry all that out and to execute that plan. And we keep that plan up to date as things change, and we modify it as need be. And that's kind of what this 2035 plan should ultimately be, should be the guidance to whoever this person is or entity to execute it. But if we don't put the funding ultimately behind it to execute it, then we're basically spinning our wheels here. None of this will really get accomplished because there's not enough bandwidth of folks to actually carry out a 30-year plan.
So what's the next step?
I think the next step is to continue getting this plan refined and get it to where we're at and ultimately make the decisions of do we head the path of a CDC. If we'd gone back to when, if we were working more regionally or had this in place when the town of Kilmarnock hired Chad to begin with, maybe he'd still be here because we could have been working to fund this, not only in the town of Kilmarnock, but all the local towns in the county could have been funding his position and making it into a bigger position than it ultimately was at the time, or could have been at the time based on the capacity that a single town had. But now that we're working more regionally and collaboratively together, I think that we can accomplish more and get more done as long as we continue to do this.
Paul, I think the other thing I heard today from Chad that is worth us figuring out how to do, and that's to go see if there are other rural Virginia communities that are structured differently than we are today. Has anybody else
Amen.
gone down this path of looking at a multi-county or town and county, combination that we can learn something from? I think there's an opportunity.
I'll take
To
the lead on
benchmark-
that
to benchmark.
somewhat from my connections with VACO and reach through those avenues and see what other communities might be doing in Virginia for that. That should be fairly easy. I don't know how many rural counties are seriously, I mean, lots of counties have this boilerplate, like I'm saying, they may have this plan that we're trying to develop, and they may have these cute handouts and stuff, but if they don't really have the bandwidth and the funding behind it to keep it going, then it will fade over time. It will ultimately not be successful.
I think about people like Pittsylvania County, that's Danville, and there's a big resurgence going on in Danville now. Obviously, there's tobacco money that was down there, and their proximity to 85 is helpful, but they used to be a county that was almost drying up.
Which county?
Pittsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and so I'm just thinking that there may be some counties like that have gone from nearly gone to circumstances have brought them around, and now they're able to look differently at their economic development work. There may
Now
be
they
some
have
there.
$650 million casino.
The money's important, but also the leadership passion. The reason, I mean, we've put money behind the river realm, but the reason why it's so successful is because the person running it has a lot of passion and has done a great job at having that passion to drive it forward.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes. It's not going to just happen because we fund it or throw a bunch of money at something, because if that solved the problem, we've solved all these problems a long time ago, because we spent a lot of money on a lot of things. But it doesn't do any good without the passion of leadership behind it, and that's the key aspect. And we're only going to get that if you basically set up and fund the position or fund the entity to do that. And that's the problem with the EDA now. They got some great missions, they got some great leaders and some great path. Now they need the money piece of it. And figure out how, what he was saying with those metrics and things, the EDA should just do a metric calculation, and then they shouldn't have to decide, well, we've only got X amount of money, we're gonna have to give a few dollars here and a few dollars there. It should be, you've met the metric, here's the $100,000, you've met the metric, here's the $10,000, and then when you can prove that you're doing those things, you get the money.
Well, Chad mentioned
Okay.
a couple of things that the biggest challenge that we have, I think, is a declining population. And that's what he said is a huge challenge. A declining population is tough.
That's a problem across all rural America.
Yeah,
It's not really
Well,
on the
yeah.
decline, it's aging too. We have,
yes.
you know, we got both.
right. And another thing he mentioned twice about having a good website for people to go to for EDA. And I think the EDA, we're going to have to come up with a little bit of our money and come up with a good website. So when people do come to Lanco VA or they want to look at our county, that we have a website that's very proactive about business.
Definitely, in the
So
21st century, if you
we'll be
don't,
looking at that.
don't have a really good
know-
website or portal to the internet, then
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he also mentioned in his that when he was in Kilmarnock, he was surprised at how many times he was essentially the front door for
Right.
some question. So, I mean, that demonstrates a need for that too.
Exactly. I would think, we should have a discussion on next month, centered around the CDC and the EDA and the inner workings of both, because in the last meeting, Roy was talking about doing some strategic planning at the EDA levels. Now, if that is going to be the place that we want to get some funding to, we need to be able to give some direction to them for their plan about what expectations we have. But if it's going to be a CDC, how is the EDA going to interplay with a CDC? I'm a lot confused about that.
Yeah,
Since we have an EDA, and I know one's a government directed, the other's a public-private partnership. I understand all that, but I don't understand how they're going to work together, and I don't understand the mechanism if it's going to come from the county.
Paul, I agree with you. 'Cause that's why I had to ask the anal question of the private sector people, because I would think that the private sector investor, in the Iredale example, is expecting some return. It's not just, I'm going to give you $100,000
Yeah.
or $5,000, and I've got to get something from that. The other piece, though, that I think we need to do in conjunction to talking about EDA mission or CDC or what is the structure, it's clearer to me that not only we've got our own 6 major initiatives, some of them are not truly ED, some of them are quality of life things, that it might behoove us to really ratchet down on the economic development side of business retention recruitment locally, hone in on that and decide how does the EDA, CDC, whatever model fit solving that problem. Because it's going to take a while to get some traction here. And if we can hone in on 3 critical things that are truly economic development, not quality of life, because I think the localities are taking care of a lot of the quality of life stuff, I'll say. But if we can hone in on the economic development, going back to that example of remote work, if we truly want to bring 25 to 50-year-olds here for remote work, what does that look like? Do we need another site more than what we have? Do we need to really hone in on our broadband initiative? Are we expecting people to work from home when they do that, and now housing becomes the issue? We're going to, I think, have to get a lot more granular about the things we want the EDA to do or incentivize or put structure around. I think we can provide some more leadership on the finiteness of that. And that was my big takeaway today. We've got our plan is a great plan. We still need to drill down pretty fast on what are we doing to recruit and retain who we have, and how do we address the workforce piece, because the workforce piece is a non-starter for anybody new coming in. Because we can't answer it, I don't think.
I do think we have some of that, the good groundwork in here, because we do have the community college. We do have a prospect of a business working with the community college to develop a workforce. So we have all those pipelines that can happen. It's just a matter, again, having the leadership and it all defined. So if you have that person that picks up the phone and is like, I've saw that y'all have some sites down there visible. Can you tell me about all those things? You have that person to talk to, or that entity that has all that
Yeah.
information, or then can send you to the next person.
That's the mechanics of it.
That's the
I agree.
mechanics of the
That's the
piece of it.
mechanics of it. But I think this body, where I was coming from, is I think this body can take our strategic economic development work and really hone in on some near-term, 0 to 5 year deliverables that we want the EDA or the CDC or whatever the structural group is to deliver.
To
I
deliver.
think those, and we carve off recreation and we carve off some other stuff and we say, county's gonna take care of that, the locality's gonna take care of that. But the true economic development piece to get us, I guess where I'm coming to is, we need to be really discreet and purposeful about what the near-term mission is.
I agree, like, I mean.
Very intentional.
Taking
Yeah.
that, like, fiber for all that we're developing and marketing that
Right.
toward what you're saying there, the
Right.
job, work from home. Is like, we've got fiber here, the best fiber in the nation.
Yeah.
Come to Lancaster County, because you can go out on your boat
And we've
in
got
the
a fac-
morning and fish,
yeah.
and then work in the afternoon, and then go back out fishing
And
in
we've
the
got
afternoon.
15 coffee cafes where you can come in and Wi-Fi. I don't know if that's the answer, but, I mean,
Yep.
if we're talking about remote work, who are we want to talk to? And if it's 20 to 35-year-olds, that's a different audience than 45 and up, that maybe it's a second career. Maybe that's, this to me today was, we need to get a lot more intentional about the individual strategies so that we can direct and suggest to the EDA or whoever our final body is what they need to do.
And Paul, going back to your question on how an EDA versus a CDC would interplay, I don't have those answers right now either. I'm not sure whether one would morph into the other, or they would be working separate bodies that would like interplay with each other in some way. I don't have the answer or the solution to that either right now.
I think we got to figure that out. As Susan says, it's granular. But I think if you look at all our 6 core strategies, they're all going to come into play in order for us to rebuild that core population that we're losing. But I also agree with Susan, we need to really focus on this economic development piece and figure it out in the short term, because we do have an EDA that wants to re-energize and revamp itself, and it's on us to give them the direction they need to create the strategy that flows into 2035. But if it's not going to be the EDA, and we want some quasi-government type entity like a CDC, we got to figure that out quickly and see how it is, because I don't think the citizens of the county, obviously we have a communication strategy, and that communication strategy has got to be pretty clear about who's doing what. And then, of course, we're talking about this economic development, but it's going to go nowhere without this workforce development piece with Jessica and the RCC, and without housing. And so, this workforce housing issue is another critical issue. So we've got several of these issues that we've really got to come to grips with and get some things going in the short term with.
I mean, all these things.
Paul,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. Paul, I'd say my takeaways is, and I agree with everything Susan said. I think we need to find another model, and maybe it's Danville, Pennsylvania. I know some folks there very well. That I think we don't need to recreate the wheel when it comes to structure. I think we could, save ourselves a lot of time to find out what's worked elsewhere. And then, next meeting, I'd like a little discussion over. I think we banter about the public-private partnership term a lot. What exactly does that mean? That's why I asked Chad that question. They probably have 150 or 200 big league corporations that are helping them. Who knows, maybe 1,000. Our demographics are less, and I don't see individuals joining in there. So, what does that mean for us? Not that it couldn't work, but I'd like some discussion on that.
I think so. All right, well, we're at our time. And I have for the next meeting a discussion about public-private partnerships and really what that means. and the CDC and the EDA. And if we can gather some thoughts, and Jeff, if you can check with some of your sources over at Pennsylvania or Danville,
Yeah.
and some info there.
And
Jason.
Paul, can you add one more thing to your list? Add one more thing to your list, because we keep throwing around this workforce and development workforce. We need a clear understanding from Jessica, because she's also talked to me offline about what she's planning to do in the school. But can we get a clear message from her on exactly the steps that she looking at taking starting this fall? Because I know she's starting something, but we don't really know what that is. But we need the clear direction on where she's going starting this fall.
Yeah.
And again, what Chad was saying too, in that regards, was like, people would come to him and say, well, we have this interest in doing X in your county. It's going to require X workforce. He then goes to his schools and his school leaders and says, we've got interest. Can you develop the curriculum to help support these businesses? And then that would funnel into the community colleges. So it would start early on. So if you're going to create a pipeline for workforce, you don't just go to the community college and say, can you create these workers now?
Yeah.
We start to create an avenue that would just be in general like that. So like, if any new businesses or current businesses wanted to expand, we could then go to the schools and they could help develop around a curriculum that would help support that as well.
So, basically, if she can just say, okay, these are the steps we're going to begin in September, so we know what's going on. I mean, it's kind of general now. So I think maybe she, because she's talked to me off and on for the last couple of months about this, but I still don't have a good
Yeah, I know
feel
they're
for.
moving things forward. I
Yeah.
don't think they have it completely refined either.
Amen.
I was in the Chamber of Commerce meeting yesterday, and Keegan Walters, one of the new additions to the chamber meeting is that they'll have representation from the schools. Keegan was there, and one of the things that he shared is that they are now reintroducing trades at a middle school level.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was
Yeah,
incredibly
yeah,
positive news.
Definitely. It's funny how things just go in a circle sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a result of some of the conversations we had a year ago with contractors. But anyway, I think we've got everything set for our next meeting, which will be the second Wednesday in July at 10 o'clock. And I'll be sending notices out as well as minutes of this meeting in the next week or two.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All
Paul.
right, guys. Thank you.
I mean,
Bye.
And Susan, thank you for bringing Chad to us. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
the
Thanks.
benefit
All
of
right.
having this
Will do.
other entity
And adjourn.
is that we can create something like, we have all these foundations around here. We have the DuPont Foundation, the Three Rivers Foundation. They have tons and tons of money that people die and leave them money or get grant money to them for their mission, appointed missions.